Hi, and thank you for joining us for this episode of The State of Leadership, Simple and Beyond. That is Robert Hilliard. I am Whitney Wiley, and you'll notice that we have a guest with us today, and we will introduce her in just a second. Robert, you have the pleasure of introducing our guest. Before we get started, how are things going?
Things are going great. How are things going in your neck of the woods, Whitney?
It's cold. California cold.
It's not cold.
I caveated. I said California cold.
Okay, California cold.
For me, it is. It's California cold. So, but you're right. It's not like New York cold or anything like that. Why don't you go? Say that again.
I was going to ask where's Cathy calling in from? I wanted to find out where she's calling in from. Is it cold where you are?
Oh, you're muted.
All right. I'm in Vancouver, Canada.
Okay.
And normally we are kind of a little cooler version of California. But right now we've had snow on the ground for a whole week. And for us, that is strange. But We're kind of hovering back and forth right around freezing. So West Coast cold.
West Coast cold. Got it.
Except that if there's snow on the ground, it's cold. I'm sorry. I'm just... So, Robert, why don't you go ahead and introduce our guest?
I certainly will. Just give me a second and I'll pull it up. Cathy Derksen is the founder of her company, Inspired Tenacity Global Solutions Incorporated. She is a disruptor and catalyst dedicated to improving the lives of the women in her community and around the world. Cathy helps women rediscover their brilliance, find their voice, and step into new possibilities in their lives. She is an international speaker and an 18 times #1 best-selling author with stories that inspire readers to take a leap of faith into reaching for their big goals. With that, we'd like to welcome Cathy to our show.
Well, thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
It's great to have you.
Excited to have you, Cathy. So I saw that Cathy and I go back a couple of years. I don't know, 4 years or so now. We were
4-ish, yeah.
We were in a book titled Invincible No More, right? Invisible No More, Invincible Forevermore.
That's
is the full title of the book. And then Cathy has since gone on to publish lots of books. It not just be a contributor to a book, but you've actually built business off of publishing books. And so I saw the post of the new book, LeadHERship Unveiled. And of course, we talk about leadership here. And I was like, well, we've got to have Cathy on the show. Someone that I know, someone who's doing great work, working with women, working in leadership. And so I thought it would be a good fit for us to talk with you and hopefully some of the other authors of your book. And learn about what it is you guys are doing and how you are hoping that your stories will change leadership. So, Cathy, tell us about this book, LeadHERship Unveiled, and why you wanted to publish this book.
Perfect. Well, leadership in general, and especially focused on women in leadership, is definitely a very important subject to me. And I think part of that is that I see it that I think women are shifting what leadership looks like. You know, helping us move away from those old hierarchies where there was one person at the top making all the decisions and everyone below them just had to do what they were told. And I think we're really bringing in a whole different flavor to leadership and having it more collaborative, more inclusive, more looking at everybody contributing given their own gifts and how they fit into the group. And the LeadHERship Global book is actually a community project from the LeadHERship Global community. So all of the authors in it are members of that community. And that's actually the third book that I did in the last couple months that's focused on women in leadership. So back in December, I released 2 other books. One was called Grit and Tenacity, Women Transforming Leadership in Business and Community. And the other one was called The Evolution of Leadership in STEM, Women Catalyzing Change. So really, we've got those 3 books that are all focused on how women are shifting and transforming leadership.
I love that.
Great. Yeah, that's great.
Love that.
So you've written a lot. I know I read a chapter from one of your books. Is that and Whitney, just clarify, was that the book that's out now, or that was a book that you published before?
Which one are you referring to?
Whitney, you shared that with me, Whitney. What was that?
Okay, that was probably the one from the LeadHERship Global.
Okay, great.
So that one just released on Friday. Yeah, February 7th. That one was just released.
So it's timely. Great. So, I have a couple of questions because I read that chapter and I was really, I want to say inspired. I was inspired by it because it's funny, you focus on women in leadership, but a lot of what I read mirrored some of my experience.
I'm sure, yes.
universal, lessons there. So I wanted to start at the beginning. So just tell us a little bit about your journey and what led to you working and writing this kind of stuff.
Well, it's a story that you would not predict. And I always say that if you'd asked me 5 years ago, if I saw myself getting into being an author and publishing books, I would have laughed at you because there was nothing in my past history or on my radar at that point that indicated any of this was going to be my life. And my original career was actually in medical genetics. Mm-hmm. We were talking earlier about education and university and all those fun things. And yes, I spent many years in school. And so medical genetics was where I worked for about 25 years, and mainly in hospital labs and public education. And, I hit a time in life that I was rethinking, what am I here for and what's my gift? And at that point, I knew I wanted to do something that was really more focused on creating a true impact in the lives of individuals, and especially with women. At that point, I was going through a divorce, had 2 teenagers. And so obviously the women's community is one that I connected with directly. So at that point, I knew I wanted to do something that created this true impact in women's lives. And at that time, I went into financial planning, thinking, well, that's an area where I could really help some women change their life. But of course, after about a decade in that field, you realize that you're so confined in the rules and regulations of that area that I really was not creating the impact that I felt that I was here to have. And that's why I left that all behind about 4 years ago now and set out on my own to create my own business and really just figure out what is my gift and what am I here to bring to the world. And around the same time, I started getting involved in these books. And of course, when I got started, I was just one of the authors in somebody else's book. And I found that I loved participating in it. I love sharing my story. It's almost therapeutic in a way to put your journey on paper and send it out in the world. But it really started opening doors that I didn't even see before. And next thing I knew, I was being invited in different communities on different book projects. So as you mentioned in the bio, so far I've been involved in 18 different books.
Wow.
And so that I've worked with over a dozen different publishing groups with all of those projects. So every book has a different community brought together. Every book takes you into a whole different way of, different theme, different way of looking at your own experience and what you're doing. And so I just discovered that I love doing these books, and I felt they created a lot of impact in my life. So I realized this is what I'm here to do, to make this opportunity available to more people. And here we are.
It's great. That's great. It's interesting because not everybody writes. And I know we're going to talk about, your book and all that stuff, but what made you decide that you wanted to be an author as well as an entrepreneur?
I think it really was around story, knowing the impact that stories can have, and knowing that by sharing our story of what we've come through, how we've come through it, I think other people really, we find strength in each other's stories. We find role models, we find guidance. And to me, I think that's really what it was about, not so much the writing per se. I'm actually dyslexic.
Oh.
So throughout all my whole education and my life, writing was never something that was my go-to. Writing and reading were both, on the more challenging side for me. And I'm definitely a slow reader. I love most of the books that I read these days are on Audible. So I can hit at a regular pace. But yeah, so because of that, being an author, being a writer, being in publishing was never on my radar. So it's kind of interesting how just this journey of sharing my story has brought me into this world.
That's great. That's great. Whitney,
Cathy,
go ahead.
I was going to say, one of the things that you said in your chapter in LeadHERship Unveiled is that your vision, and you're articulating this a little bit, that your vision for this book is to inform and inspire women around the world to take on their own journeys, their own leadership journeys. And so I'm just curious how that transition happened for you. I know you're in healthcare and in the lab, but how has wanting to help women embrace their own journeys, how did that piece come about for you?
Yeah, and you know what? I think a lot of it was really just following my intuition. When I was at that point, when I was rethinking life and rethinking what are my gifts and what am I here to really do, at that point, it really was listening to my intuition and following my gut around what I really felt inspired to do. And so it's, like you say, it's really nothing close to what I was doing before. And as I mentioned, that this was never on my radar or what I would do, but really just following my gut and following what felt right. And I give COVID credit for opening the whole world up and putting us all on Zoom, and really the whole world now has become next door neighbors. And for instance, this book, the LeadHERship Unveiled book, we had women from US, Canada, Australia, India, South Africa, Sweden, the Netherlands, Poland, who also lives in Dubai. So we literally had a global community of women just in that 20 women that were in that book. So my whole world has become just an international community because Zoom has allowed us to do this, to really interact and communicate so easily with people anywhere.
And is that part of the why now, right? For the book, why now? Why this book? Why now?
I think especially going back to COVID and going back to the fact that, the data shows us that women, as far as progressing into more equality in the workforce and otherwise, that we did slide backwards, that some of the progress we had made over time was diminished. And so I think now it's so important to really be spotlighting the accomplishments that women are having and to reinforce the idea that there are no limits, that we do not need to live in a box that somebody else made, that we really can imagine where we want to be, what we want to be doing, the impact we want to be having, and just go do it. And so to me, that's a big part of it. Just we need to be reinforcing that, showing the role models, giving the examples, and just really opening those doors.
That's great. I have a question. When I was reading your chapter, I came across a couple of really excellent passages. One of them said that your chapter, it mentioned that your vision for your future and your definition of leadership has changed. So how so?
Well, I would say back in those days, when I was working in healthcare and really in an environment where it was that one person on top, everybody else just shut up and do your job, don't ask questions, don't push the limits. And that really was kind of the model that I had grown up with and had assumed this was leadership. And after leaving all that behind and stepping into this world of being an entrepreneur is really when it opened my eyes to what all these other models of leadership are and how things are changing. And so I would say that was the big part for me, just stepping out of that little world that I had lived in before and realizing that there's so many other options. There's other perspectives. There's other ways of doing things that work much better.
Yeah. The hierarchical leadership model, it works in one sector, but it doesn't work in all, right?
I'm not sure it really works anywhere, because I think all individuals need to feel that they, as an individual, are being valued for the job that they're doing, the contribution that they're making, who they are as an individual. And as I mentioned, where I had worked before, it literally was, don't ask questions, don't push the buttons that you're not supposed to, just literally sit down, do your job, shut up.
Wow.
and especially when you're looking at a group, again, this was when I was working in medical genetics. So you've got a group of people who are intelligent, curious, outgoing, well-educated. They are not people who came into life to sit down and just push buttons. They're people who want to have a conversation. They want to explore a bigger picture. They want to know what's next. What about this? Well, how would that work? They're curious people. They're not people who want to just sit in a little box. And so I think if that leader had understood that, she had a team of people that would have been valuable assets in many ways to her organization, to the progress of the lab, to even developing new ways of doing things. But rather than seeing it that way and giving people any freedom, she really was keeping things in a little box.
I find that fascinating because quite possibly, or probably, the reason why those folks got into that field was because they were curious people and asked questions.
Oh, yes.
But then they get into the job and they're not allowed to be curious or ask questions.
Yeah, and that's why a lot of us did leave. One went off and was a lawyer, another went off and went into animation, and others that went into other medical areas. And yes, many of us left for those reasons.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Whitney, you have anything you would like to add to that? Because I know you have thoughts.
No, not on that.
So you don't really define leadership, and you were very clear about that. It's not a hierarchical thing. So how do you define it now? What would you define it? If you could just give it a sentence or two, how would you define it?
I would say a leader is someone who brings out the best in everyone around them, who doesn't just focus on themselves and what they can accomplish, but what can we accomplish together? And so to me, that's whether they're in politics, whether they're in business, whether it's a family situation or a community, it's those people that can really make other people feel valued, to make them feel inspired, to make them feel like we are part of this together. To me, that's what a leader does. It brings people together and brings out the best in everyone.
Yeah, I think what I love about that is you didn't mention title at all.
No. And I would say in every level and layer and situation, there are leaders among us.
Yeah, I love that.
Title is not required.
Title is not required.
And so before we got started, we were talking about how we knew each other, and Robert and I went to grad school together. We went to St. Joseph's on the East Coast, and it's a Jesuit school, and that's very much the foundation of Jesuit philosophy around leadership, right? Is that we're all leaders. And at the time, I did not recognize when I was applying to schools I did not recognize that I was looking for a place where my leadership philosophy actually made sense. That was something that I felt and knew instinctually, but was I very much like you, was not seeing in the experiences that I was having in work, right? Which was the person with the title was the leader, and everyone else just basically did what they were told. And I'm a bit of a rebel, and that did not work for me. And so until I got into a place where I could step into, and I know this is something that matters to you, where I could step into self leadership, right? I was not thriving. And so but it was the lessons of trial and error and being in environments where I was with people that, that I was observing. It's like, that's not very good leadership, right? That we learned some of these things. So I want to ask you, we're talking with you, but you are one of 20 contributors to this particular book, LeadHERship Unveiled. And so, what are some of the other stories that are in the book? And eventually, as I said earlier, we would like to connect with and interview some of the other contributors to the book. But what are some of the other standout stories that are a part of this book that people should know about?
Yes, yes. Oh, let's see. There were so many amazing stories. And one of the women, she focused a lot on where she learned her leadership skills and recognized that it came from her parents, had been immigrants to America, who had come over to the North America with nothing, and literally built a business, built a family, built their life from nothing. And they were like in their early 20s and, really had very little life experience and just did it and made all this progress through that. Others were focused around one of the women, her husband had died when, before she was starting her business, and just the devastation. She had small children at the time. They had all these dreams and plans of what life was going to look like. And suddenly her whole world got flipped upside down, and she had to start all over and find that strength and that community to really take on a whole new life on her own. Several stories around how women have just stepped away from the corporate world, whether they had been in jobs and companies where it really was a toxic environment to work in, and rather than trying to battle that uphill system, they decided, I'm just leaving this and I am starting my own business, and I am going to run this business in a way that demonstrates my values, my perspectives, and really manage the same thing. We've had people in the finance industry who have left completely to, again, do it their way and get that information to people that they need, and there's resources to really manage their finances, but not in the traditional model. So a lot of it was around how women had really taken a different look at their life and what their options were, and realized that they had so much, like I said, there's really no limits, and that they could accomplish these bigger things. One of the chapters is focused around mentorship and how, finding a mentor and being a mentor are such valuable things, either as we're the ones coming up, or whether we're the ones who have stepped to the top and now we're putting our hand down to reach for those that are coming up behind us. So there's so many amazing stories like that.
I love that. And what I'm hearing sort of as some themes, resilience, right?
Yes, yes.
And charting your own path and being willing to start over again. And something that we talk about a lot here on the State of Leadership, lessons, the importance of the lessons that we learn, not only for ourselves, but to help us develop and step into our values, and then to help others with that. And I think that goes along with your definition of leadership, which, and Robert can confirm, but I think aligns very much with our perspective about leadership and the definition, and that it is not about the leader, right? It's not about us. It's about the other people that we have the great fortune, I think, to be able to impact and influence and to empower, to help them become the best versions of themselves. And if that is in a corporation, great, right? It allows the corporation to grow and to serve its clients and customers, but it's just as important in families and community.
Yes.
And with the people that we spend our time with on a daily basis.
Yeah, I definitely.
So,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to mention too, Whitney, you mentioned a little while ago about self-leadership. And I think that that's a piece that has really been missing for decades and is really just kind of coming into recognition now. And really, until you stepped into self-leadership and really focused on developing yourself and your values and your perspectives, then it's really hard to lead other people.
Yeah.
So that, yes, to me, self-leadership has to be the first part that you develop in leadership.
Well, certainly leading others in a way that is not about your referent power, Robert? Referent power. Robert is the one that keeps me grounded to our education. Because he remembers the books we read, that came from this book, and on this page you can find this reference. But yeah, and so it is, that it doesn't have to be grounded in that authority, and that as we are shifting further and further in general, although, and we don't talk politics here on the show,
we won't go there.
There is, I feel like, an effort being made to go back to what was. So, yeah, leadership wise.
It's really interesting because, Cathy, as you were talking about some of the other authors and what got them involved in the project, one thing that stood out for me, or I could hear, was that we typically don't really think about when it comes to leadership is culture, whether it's our the culture of our our ethnicity or our family culture, and community, how those things help us become leaders. And a lot of the lessons that you learn come from culture a lot of times, and community. And we sometimes just leave that out. And it reminded me of a situation years ago, actually right when I was getting ready to go back to school, to grad school, before I knew the wonderful Whitney. I went out to dinner with a friend of mine and her fiance. And she was saying, she was asking me about going back to school and what made me decide to go back to school and what I was going to study. And I said, organizational development and leadership. And her fiance started laughing. And she said, my friend turned to me and said, "Oh, you have to excuse me. He thinks that leaders are born, not made." And I started laughing because it's this old, mindset that you either have it or you don't. But we know from studying this and living this that you can learn so much from just the way you're brought up in your home and in your community and through your culture that will help you be a leader. And sometimes those lessons are lost because sometimes other people buy into this notion that, well, I'm not a leader. Somebody else has to tell me what to do because I don't have these inborn traits or whatever. So I love that those stories are so varied, but have a common thread.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I agree with you that yes, this whole idea versus whether leaders are born or developed. And I truly believe that we all have some level of leadership skills innately in who we are. And it really is around those experiences we've had and what we've been encouraged to do, and even what we feel like we're allowed to do. Because I think for so many of us, that's a big part of it, that we've grown up with that message that you're not allowed to do that. This is not for you. And so I think busting down those things and realizing that those rules, whoever made them up, you know what, that's just someone who made those up, that we all have a place to develop into, and we all have some level of leadership. And like what we were saying, whether it's in your family, whether it's in your church, whether it's in your community, like leadership is all around us.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Our job is simply to step into that. And when people ask that question of me, are leaders made or born? I just say yes. Because it's, you know, some people have have more inherent, the traits, the qualities are more inherent. Yes. Others can learn, but most of us have, I think, some aspects, and we can develop. There's always the opportunity to develop. And our show is called The State of Leadership, Simple and Beyond. And Simple is a framework for developing those traits and those skills and adapting the principles. It starts with self-awareness. And, you know, you're talking about self-leadership, but self-awareness. How are you showing up? What are you doing? You know, are you focused on yourself? Or are you focused on helping others to be better? Right. And if we can become better people, it makes us better leaders, just because it goes hand in hand.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, no, I agree. And kind of going back to what you were mentioning a little while ago too, about how it seems like leadership trends are going backwards. And I'm a true believer in the tipping point model, that, you know, it only takes so many, and then it tips the scale back in the other direction. And I think that, you know, for each of us, it's our responsibility to step into that leadership, step into creating that positive environment in, again, whether we're at home or at school or in the workplace, because I truly believe that the more the positive leadership adds up, we will tip that scale. We will hit that tipping point and push things back in a direction that is moving forward in a humane, positive, inclusive, everyone together model.
That's great. So one of the things that I loved about your chapter was the end when you started talking about the lessons. Can you share with our listeners some of the lessons that you learned along the way?
Good point. Let's see. I'll have to go back and remember what I wrote. And
you can fake it. They won't know.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I know one of the ones that I always bring up is community, that creating and developing and bringing yourself into a community of people who are supportive and encouraging, who are role models. And I find, especially for those of us who are stepping into leadership and entrepreneurship, that quite often our immediate family and friends around us aren't the ones who are really encouraging us and supporting us in whatever crazy mission we're on. Sure. But to find a community of people who get it, who they're not doing the exact same thing as you necessarily, but they understand what you're trying to do and the crazy journey that you're on. So really, community to me is one of the big things. And another piece there was too, that idea of doing it your way. Don't be a leader modeled after, this is what a leader should look like. Mm-hmm. Be who you are. And how is it that you support and lift other people? And when I first came into being an entrepreneur, I had this impression that I've been told that, you know, to be successful, you have to be big and flashy and like really gung ho, and everyone's got to hear you and see you. And but whenever I would try that, it didn't feel right. Like it just wasn't me. And then I just finally allowed myself to see that I'm a leader in more of a quiet, supportive way. And as soon as I allowed myself to be that, to be me, and to lead in a way that's authentic to me, everything changed.
Yes.
So those are definitely a couple things that I would support, is really find your community and be your authentic self.
That's great.
I love that. You know, if I were going to pick one of the lessons and you had a couple, we won't share them all because we want people to want to buy the book and to read it. But that one about embracing your unique style. And I think like you, I had some, you know, I would say maybe some doubts early on. It wasn't so much that people were telling me to do it a particular way, but people that I admired and on some level resonated with were big and I don't know, flashy. And I was thinking, well, then I need to do it that way. And it's very similar to you. I was like, that's not my style, right? I'm an introvert and it's okay to be an introvert. Yes. It's okay, right? I can be gregarious and connect with people, but then, you know, I'm ready to go take a nap. So, you know, but other people they're on and that feeds them. And that's not what works for me. And it's okay. It's okay. And so again, that self-awareness, who are you? Right? What are your values? What matters to you? And don't let what it looks like other people are doing or the way other people do it say to you that that's the only way that it can be done. And you've got to find your own pathway.
Yes. And one of the things as well in this journey of figuring out, you know, what my gift was and what I'm bringing to the world and how I got into doing these books as part of my business was when I really realized that one of my superpowers is bringing people together and bringing them into community. And I think that's really where the books come in, because that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm bringing women from around the world together to find that common bond, to create something together. And for me, that's what energizes me. That's what makes me feel like, wow, yes, this is it. So the books really just kind of slipped in exactly with what that basics, that innate skill I have.
Great.
Awesome.
I have one question, which is a compound question. So what's next for you? What's next for you, and where can people purchase the book?
Perfect. Thank you. Well, what's next? I always have more books coming up. So if anyone's interested in writing a chapter and becoming an international best-selling author in a collaboration book, then definitely connect with me. A couple of the ones coming up. One is called Inspired Metamorphosis. So that's people sharing their journey of how they've literally completely changed their life. I've got another one called 20 Shades of Grief.
Oh, wow.
Where people are sharing their journey in grief and how lessons learned to support other people in their journey with grief. And I've got another one that's focused on women in science and tech. I've called that one Women in STEAM, a Global Movement. So that will be, again, women around the world who work in all sorts of different fields of science and tech and all of the connected industries. And so always more books coming. And I'm starting to add retreats as well, and trips to New York City to have your face on a billboard as part of the book. So those are all new things. And the best way to connect with me is through my website. So inspiredtenacity.com. And on there, one of the tabs is new book projects. On there, you'll find what the new titles are that you can join in with. And you'll also find links to purchase the books of the ones that have come out recently.
Fantastic.
Awesome. Well, Cathy, do you have any final words or thoughts you'd like to leave with the audience before we wrap up?
Sure. I always love to share this one quote. It's a Howard Thurman quote, and it's, "Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive, and go do that. Because what the world needs is more people who have come alive." And to me, that just sums up everything.
That's great.
I love that. How about you, Robert? Any final thoughts?
No final thoughts. I really love this conversation. It was so funny. You were talking about being in, healthcare from the genetics part, and then finance. I was in finance and then in healthcare. So I had that. I was like, oh, wow, it resonated so well with me. So I know that these books they're women's stories, but I think that anybody can benefit and find some type of touchstone from reading these chapters. So,
Definitely. Yes.
It's a very universal.
Well, Cathy, we want to thank you for making time to come and share your story, share this project, and the future projects. And so definitely wish you well. And if you are interested in purchasing any of the books or checking out Cathy and future projects, or how you can get your face on a billboard in New York City, check her out at inspiredtenacity.com. Inspiredtenacity.com. Again, it's Cathy Derksen is her name. And so check her out and check out the books. Buy all the books, and then think about the stories that you can share from your life that fits in. She had, I don't think you mentioned this one this time around, Midlife Reimagined, Inspired Metamorphosis, and then you have the Women in STEAM, right? And so check those out as potential opportunities for you to share your story, and then check out her book, LeadHERship Unveiled. Again, you can find that at her website. So, Robert,
What?
don't want to leave without giving you an opportunity to share, if someone's interested in connecting with you, how they can go about doing that.
Sure. People can find me inspire me at roberthilliardcoaching.com, or just go to my website, Robert Hilliard Coaching. There is a contact form in there. You can fill it out. Let me know what challenges you may be having or what goals you have, and we can set up a discovery call to see if we're a good match for each other.
Awesome. And if you want to connect with me, you can do so at shiftingintoaction.now.site, shiftingintoaction.now.site. And if you're interested in being a guest on the program, or you have an idea for a topic you would like for us to cover and related to leadership, please drop a note for either Robert or I. So again, we want to thank you for joining us. The State of Leadership, Simple and Beyond. We're here on Thursdays, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific. Cathy, thank you so much for joining us. We wish you the absolute best with this project and all your future projects. And when you've got other books that are touching on leadership topics, we would love to have you back.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Until next time, take care.